Ladies and gentlemen, stop what you're doing right now because what I'm about to tell you will make you look at your favorite rappers completely different. You thought rap beef was just about a couple diss tracks? You thought it was just some corny back and forth on social media? Right. This is the story of the day Camron, Harlem's own, pink fur wearing, trash-talking legend found out exactly why you don't play games with Curtis 50 Cent Jackson. And trust me, it wasn't just music, it was war. Think about it. How dangerous does a man have to be when entire rappers vanish from the culture after beefing with him? I'm talking about poof, missing posters, where's Waldo? Status, except it's where's Camron? Remember the man? Who gave us horse and carriage, the flashy dipset general who could outswag anyone in Harlem. Yeah, well, he ran headfirst into the Queens hustler who doesn't just diss you, he dismantles you. Piece by piece, career and all. Now let me ask you this. What happens when Harlem flamboyance meets Queens ruthlessness? What happens when pink minks collide with bulletproof vests? Spoiler alert, somebody ends up with black roses delivered to their office. And a little coffin to remind them their career just got buried. Yeah, that happened. This isn't just beef. This isn't just rap. This is a story about power plays, humiliation, betrayal, and a man who turned rap beef into a funeral procession. And today I'm pulling back the curtain on the moment Camron realized he wasn't battling a rapper, he was battling a machine. Are you ready for the truth? Or better yet, are you ready for the funeral? Let me take you back to the moment when Harlem pride met Queens ruthlessness, and the outcome was nothing short of explosive, because in the early 2000s, Camron had Harlem. Unlocked Dipset was more than a rap group. It was a movement. The pink furs, the bandanas, the oversized jerseys, they had the streets on fire, and Cam was sitting at the head of the table, convinced nobody could shake him, not Jay, not Nas, not Puffy, and definitely not some hustler from Queens who had just blown up with Get Rich or Die Trying. But Curtis Jackson was not just some rapper, he was a machine. He was a strategist. He was the kind of man who had already erased Murder Inc. from relevance and left Ja Rule looking like a cautionary tale. And that was before he even thought about clashing with Cavell. With Cam, so when the two worlds collided, it was destined to turn ugly real quick. And it all started over what seemed like a simple conversation on the radio, but it spiraled into one of the most savage beefs in hip-hop history. It was Hot 97 in 2007. 50 Cent was sitting down with Angie Martinez, running his mouth like he always did, exposing labels, talking greasy about the industry, and casually dropping bombs. Like it was nothing, and then he said it, he called Coke Records the graveyard for rappers, the place washed-up artists go when the majors won't invest in them anymore. To him, it was a retirement home, a second-tier league. And he said it like it was common knowledge, like everyone already knew, now on the other. And Camron was listening, and if there's one thing you need to understand about Cam, it is that Harlem pride cannot take that kind of disrespect. The man could ignore a lot, but not when you attack his business. Not when you try to paint his moves as desperate. So what does he do? He calls in live to the station, not later, not through a statement, not through a track. He literally interrupts 50's interview, and suddenly, what was supposed to be a casual sit-down turns into a live shouting. MATC. That call was Chaos Cam barking about Lloyd Banks. Numbers. Jim Jones numbers. Distribution deals, throwing out percentages like he was on Wall Street. He kept screaming over 50, trying to prove a point while at the same time drowning himself in noise. He was trying to clown Curtis, but 50 was calm, measured, waiting like a lion stalking prey. Cam thought he was controlling the narrative, but the truth was everyone listening that day could hear. He was rattled, he was defensive, he was loud, and the louder he got, the more control he lost. 50 barely had to raise his voice because he knew something. Cam did not know yet. This was not going to end on the phone. This was just the opening act. Now, what separates 50 from any other rapper is his ability to turn rap beef into psychological warfare, while most rappers would have responded with a diss track and maybe A video Curtis Jackson went straight to funeral mode. He released a track, literally called Funeral Music, and the title was not just clever wordplay, it was a mission statement. The beat was haunting, the lyrics were sharp, and the video that came with it looked like a eulogy for Cam's career, but that was not even the wildest part. The wildest part was what happened off the record. 50 actually had 2 bodyguards in suits deliver a coffin and 2 black roses straight to Camron's office. This was not just rap anymore, this was theater. It was intimidation. It was a mafia tactic dressed up in hip-hop clothing who thinks of sending a coffin to an enemy's office. Only a man who understands how to blend reality with spectacle to blur the line between rap and real life. Cam tried to clap back with his own diss track, calling it Curtis, mocking 50's government name and leaning into comedy. Instead of menace, he dressed it up with skits, videos of 50 as a rat in court testifying against his own crew. He leaned into humor, because that was Cam's lane. Harlem slick talk with a smile, but while fans laughed and passed around the clips, Curtis was already several steps ahead, because when 50 disses you, it is not about one record, it is about creating a narrative. He dismantles your image piece by piece until the audience stops taking you seriously, and when you stop being taken seriously in rap, your career is finished. The difference was Cam did not fully understand yet that he was fighting a man who studied warfare like Sun Tzu. What made this scandal even bigger was how 50 turned the tables inside Cam's own house. While Dipset was dealing with internal fractures, 50 exploited the cracks. He managed to bring out Jim Jones and Juelz Santana to perform with him on stage. At one of his shows, imagine that you are in a public war with a man and he is up there on stage with your crew, smiling, laughing, letting the world see that your own team is not fully loyal. That is humiliation at the highest level, and it was not just strategy, it was psychological annihilation. 50 was telling Cam without saying a word that he could infiltrate his circle, he could turn his brothers against him, and there was nothing Cam could do about it. The fans saw it, the industry saw it, and the narrative started to form. Camron was losing, and 50 Cent was playing chess while everyone else was stuck on checkers. For Cam, it was supposed to be another rap battle Dipset had gone against Jay-Z before they were used to standing tall against giants. But this was different because 50 was not just a rapper, he was a strategist, a bully, a businessman, and a troll, all wrapped into one. He knew how to manipulate media, how to bait his opponents into mistakes, how to hit them where it really hurt. Not just their pride, but their brand, their money, their legacy. What started as an argument over a label turned into a campaign of destruction, and the streets were eating it up. Cam's pride would not let him step back, so he doubled down, dropping more jokes, more skits, more bars, but slowly the laughter turned into whispers, and the whispers turned into silence. Because the more 50 pressed, the less powerful Cam looked, and the less powerful Cam looked, the harder it was for Dipset to hold together what little unity they had left. This was the beginning of the unraveling, the point where Harlem Flash met Queen's brutality, and the story shifted from being just about records sold to careers destroyed. It was the moment everyone realized that with 50 Cent, this was never just music, it was warfare, it was strategy, it was the art of making sure your opponent never stands tall again. And by the time Cam understood what he was really dealing with, it was already too late. The scandal was now in full swing, and the city could feel the tension like static in the air, because when two egos this big collide, it is never going to end quietly. And every move from here on out became part of a much bigger show that everyone wanted to see. Camron thought he could outlast 50 Cent with jokes and flashy Harlem charisma, but what he did not understand was that Curtis Jackson had a talent for turning beef into a spectator sport, and he was about to drag Cam into an arena where the rules were not fair and the crowd was bloodthirsty. After the Hot 97 meltdown and the Black Roses and Coffin incident, the streets could smell blood, and it was not 50 who looked vulnerable. It was Cam who suddenly seemed shaky and scrambling for control. Every time he opened his mouth, 50 looked stronger, and Cam looked weaker, and that is exactly how Curtis liked it, because for him, image is power, and power is everything. Everything. Anonymous stories began popping up like weeds, painting a picture that made Cam look like a man losing grip of his empire whispers about. Dipset money drying up about Cam's lavish Harlem lifestyle being funded by questionable backdoor deals about unpaid studio time and shady real estate schemes suddenly became part of the narrative. And while nobody could prove most of it, that did not matter, because the power of gossip is not about truth. It is about perception, and perception was turning. Ugly for Cam, sources claim that after the coffin was delivered, Cam became paranoid that he was calling emergency meetings with Dipset and demanding absolute loyalty. But at the same time, internal cracks grew wider. Juelz Santana was reportedly frustrated with lack of creative freedom. Jim Jones was enjoying his own solo shine with We Fly High. And the more Cam barked about family unity, the more it looked like the family was drifting apart. Insiders leaked that Cam was even considering buying loyalty with cash payouts and cars, but when loyalty has to be purchased, it is already gone. Public reaction only added fuel to the fire, because fans love a good takedown, and they had seen what 50 did to Ja Rule, so naturally they assumed Cam was next. Message boards lit up with jokes. Memes about pink caskets and Harlem funerals popped up everywhere. People compared the Cam and 50 beef to a heavyweight fight, except one fighter was punching and the other one was clowning, and eventually people stopped respecting the clown. There were fake reports that Cam had moved out of Harlem for security reasons, that Dipset offices had been raided, and that 50 had dirt ready to leak at any moment. And the funny thing is, 50 never had to confirm any of it. He just had to sit back and let the rumors do the work, because silence from Curtis was scarier than any diss record Cam might drop. Meanwhile, 50 kept the pressure steady like a professional boxer, working the body, slowly breaking down his opponent. He invited Jim Jones and Juelz Santana to perform Ballin' with him on stage, and the image of Dipset soldiers rocking alongside 50, while Cam was nowhere in sight, was a devastating blow too. Cam's credibility. That single performance was replayed across YouTube, MySpace, and every hip-hop forum of the era. It was the equivalent of a public betrayal, even if Jones and Juelz insisted later that it was nothing serious. Perception is reality, and the perception was that Cam was losing his grip. 50's camp leaked that more. Dipset members were reaching out behind the scenes, looking for opportunities outside Cam's control, and while none of this was ever fully confirmed, it did not need to be, because by then the narrative was written. And then came the so-called leaked reports about Cam's finances, painting him as a man overspending to maintain an image he could no longer afford. They said the pink Range Rover payments were overdue, that jewelry was rented, that properties in Harlem were leveraged to the point of collapse, and whether or not these reports had any basis in fact, they circulated like wildfire. One blog even published what it claimed were internal Dipset financial records showing Cam taking cuts from every artist on the label in ways that made him look greedy and exploitative. Cam went on radio denying everything, laughing it off, calling 50 a rat and a liar, but the damage was done. The public rarely forgets receipts, even fake ones. The scandal reached new heights when an anonymous source claiming to be a former Dipset insider alleged that Cam had reached out to industry middlemen to try and broker peace with 50 behind the scenes, while publicly still calling him Curtis and clowning him on DVDs. If true, this meant that Harlem's general was secretly waving a white flag while pretending to be unfazed, and fans hate nothing more than hypocrisy. Cam denied it, of course, but once that seed was planted, it grew into an ugly narrative that made him look like a desperate man trying to survive. Curtis Jackson, on the other hand, was sitting back collecting money from my team in water and smiling as his enemy drowned in bad headlines. The media played into it as well. Magazines loved the storyline because it sold issues, and websites ran sensational headlines every week. Dipset imploding, Cam running scared from 50 Cent, former allies turn on Camron every time Cam tried to clap back with another joke or another silly music video. Felt smaller than the storm surrounding him. 50 had turned him into a punchline without even having to rap much after funeral music, because at this point it was not about bars, it was about theater, about perception, about control of the narrative. Cam was being humiliated publicly and systematically, and there was nothing he could do that looked like a win. By the time the dust was settling, Harlem still loved Cam for what he represented, but the larger hip-hop world was starting to see him as another victim of the Curtis Jackson effect, and the whispers only grew louder about how long Dipset could even last under this pressure, and whether Cam himself had the strength to keep fighting when his own crew was halfway out the door. By the time the beef had stretched into its most chaotic stages, the fallout was unavoidable, and every move Cam made seemed to backfire because the weight of 50 Cent's tactics was unlike anything he had ever faced before, and even Harlem pride could only shield him so much from the growing perception that he was slipping while Curtis was soaring. Cam had always been the hustler who built his own lane, the flashy leader who turned Dipset into a cultural force, but now his empire looked shaky, with cracks showing in every direction. Juelz was leaning toward Def Jam and hinting at frustration. Jim was chasing his solo success with no interest in playing Soldier, and the younger affiliates seemed more interested in chasing quick money than keeping Dipset unified. The very crew that once walked like an army through Harlem was scattering, and at the center was Cam, trying to maintain an image of control while the walls were crumbling around him, and the world could see it even if he could not admit it. What made this period even more brutal was how the streets interpreted silence, because when 50 started to ease off publicly and dropped fewer direct shots at Cam, people assumed it was because the battle was already over, that 50 had won and moved on to the next target, that he had destroyed the Dipset boss so thoroughly that there was nothing left to say. It was almost more humiliating than the coffin and black roses, because Cam had built his reputation on being untouchable, on never backing down, but the perception now was that 50 had stripped him of that aura, leaving him looking like just another casualty in a long list of Curtis Jackson victims. Whispers spread that industry executives were distancing themselves from Camnat labels, were hesitant to invest too heavily in Dipset projects because they no longer carried the same momentum. Insiders claimed that booking shows became harder outside of New York, and promoters worried that the drama overshadowed the music, and this was exactly what 50 specialized in, not just hurting a rival's image, but choking their money flow. The final blow seemed to come when footage leaked online showing Cam getting into a heated argument on his own Harlem block with hecklers shouting G-Unit lines at him. The clip was short, shaky, and maybe not even as bad as it seemed, but the symbolism was devastating. To see the general of Harlem being mocked on his own turf by kids quoting his rival turned into an iconic moment of humiliation that spread faster than any official diss track. It was replayed, endlessly shared on forums, dissected in magazines, and every time it surfaced, it reminded people of just how badly 50 had damaged Cam's standing. This was no longer just about rap. This was about image, about dominance, about survival in a culture that eats weakness alive. Looking back, it is almost surreal to realize how quickly things unraveled. What started as a phone call on Hot 97 escalated into one of the most vicious psychological wars the culture had seen. And by the end, it was clear that Camron had underestimated just how dangerous 50 Cent really was. This was not just about bars. This was about chess moves, about narrative control, about dismantling an empire without even firing many direct shots. The aftermath left Cam with scars that never fully healed, and left fans with one undeniable lesson: when you step into the ring with Curtis Jackson, you are not just battling a rapper, you are going up against a strategist, a businessman, and a predator who plays for keeps. And once he sets his sights on you, there is no walking away untouched. And now here we are at the end of this wild ride, and the only thing left to ask is, what do you really think happened? Because was this just another rap beef blown out of proportion by gossip blogs and hungry fans? Or was this the moment that proved 50 Cent's genius for psychological warfare, do you think? Camron was simply unlucky enough to get caught in the crosshairs of someone who knew how to weaponize silence, perception, and money. Or do you believe Cam still had a fighting chance that history just never gave him the credit for the beauty of stories like this is that they never really end because people are still debating them. Years later, people are still dissecting the clips, replaying the interviews, arguing over who really won and who got crushed, and that is exactly why we keep diving into these scandals, because hip-hop is not just about music. It is about myth. It is about the larger-than-life characters who build empires and then risk losing them all. So if you want more of these raw, unfiltered breakdowns of the stories they don't want you to know, then hit that like button, drop your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe.